Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik with Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about something very special. I got a device called the Shinybow SB-2840. Terrible name. Also known as the SCART RGB to component audio plus video converter. Again, terrible name. So before we get into this, I want to give a big thank you to Corey Marsh. The name might sound familiar. He's a longtime Patreon backer. I think he was actually there since the very beginning of my Patreon, so thank you for that. And this device might also sound familiar because he donated it. He donated it a few months ago on an old episode of Playload, and so I want to thank him for that. So I now finally have had time to sit down and talk about it, so we're going to do exactly that. However, there's a couple of... The theme of this video will probably be asterisks, because there's a whole lot of yes, but this. And the first one right off the bat is, while I do a whole lot of videos talking about various cables and, you know, video quality and all that kind of stuff, I admit I probably was not the best choice to review this particular device, because the ultimate purpose of this device is to use on a CRT. I don't own a CRT, so I can only talk about this thing kind of from a distance and tell you kind of what I know about it and what I have used of it, but to ultimately give the fairest and possible clearest review, I simply lack one of the tools to make that possible. So I can only tell you so much. So I told Corey that, but he seemed to be still rather insistent that I proceed with this. So thank you, Corey, for the opportunity, and I'm just letting you guys know, I'm sorry, at the end of this, I don't have the best possible review that could have been produced, so I am sorry. But let's move forward with what I can tell you. Now, if you're totally out of the loop here, you have no idea what's going on, let me tell you the basics of this. This device, at its core, the simplest possible explanation of what it is, when you take an old, you can take an old game console, hook it up to this thing, hook this thing up to your TV, and it looks better than it used to. That's the purpose. Now that concept might sound extraordinarily familiar. I've done videos on several things just like that. This one, for example, this is the HD video converter. This is a SCART input to HDMI output device. I used to be drinking the Kool-Aid hard on this thing, you know, like 4 years ago. But the problem with this thing is it's an introductory cheapo device. Now at the time I was blown away by it because I had never seen any retro game console look as good. But then after using things like the Framemeister, I realized that this thing really is pretty much junk. The only reason to have this is really just to teach yourself the basics of the technology and really nothing more. Which I would recommend if you're just really curious about this type of thing. If you want to just try it all, this is the cheapest route to figure that stuff out, but it's not ultimately the device I would say to actually use. That's up to you though. The device I ended up using, as previously mentioned, is the Framemeister, which I've also done a video on. Now that thing is the Ferrari of this concept. It's unbelievably good at, you know, taking all of your old game consoles and making them look exceptionally better. The difference between something like this and that is that this thing takes a signal and just kind of balloons it up so that it'll work on your TV and you just kind of get basic access to it, but it adds a lot of other issues to it, whereas the Framemeister redraws every single pixel and it looks flawless. Then there's things like the OSSC, which incidentally was also donated to me by Corey Marsh, so thank you once again, Corey. That device is basically a cheaper alternative to the Framemeister while doing a lot of what it can do well, some things it can't do and some things it can, but not as well. My review of it, I thought it had some issues, now some of which have actually been worked out since, and I'd love to try it again, but I don't have the updated version. So for the time, I stick with the Framemeister. Now, the difference between those three devices and this one is those three devices are designed for an ecosystem of a person who likes their retro game consoles, but wants to play them on a high-definition television. This is different because this is designed for exactly the opposite. This is designed for someone who wants to play all of their retro game consoles on a CRT older style television, but still have them look better. Now, as I mentioned, I don't even own an older CRT. This one specifically is for people with component inputs on their CRTs, and I think they only made those for like 5 or 6 years. I could obviously be very wrong about that. But that said, a lot of people in the retro community actually do have those, so I don't think that's the biggest issue. Just know that going in. If you are the kind of person who has an HD TV setup, you don't own a CRT, this is not going to be for you. You're going to want one of the other ones. If you do have a CRT with component inputs, this is probably what you want. So how does all of this work if you're not familiar? Well, a lot of our older game consoles, let's use an example like the Super Nintendo, have within them various video signal capabilities. At their core, what they are capable of broadcasting is a signal known as RGB. Now, we didn't have the equivalency of any sort of cable that could use that over here. What happened in North America is what we would do is we'd take our composite cables that came with the console. Maybe if you were lucky enough to have S-video cables, you'd grab those and you'd plug them into the console. The console would be like, all right, man, I got this RGB signal. This is how I want you to see it. Let's go ahead. Oh, you have composite connected. All right, well, I have this video decoder built in me and I'm gonna downgrade the signal so that you'll see something on your TV. That's basically how it worked. If you had S-video, it would at least separate the colors from the contrast a bit and it would look sharper, but it still wasn't ideal. However, in Europe and in Australia, they didn't really have this problem. They had another cable known as SCART, this thing. Now don't feel bad if you're in North America and you've never seen this before, but this is gaining a lot of popularity in recent years. This was a cable that they had that it was basically the HDMI of its day, in that it was poorly made, easily broken, but fucking awesome anyway. It has the ability to carry both video and sound over it, and its video outputs have multiple options. Like HDMI can support multiple resolutions, this can support entirely different frequencies. That's not video resolution and picture clarity, not the same thing. Graphics also not the same thing. 3 different things, don't mix them all together. But basically, if you had a game console that supported only composite, but you connected SCART cables to it, that's fine. It supports composite, it'll pass it along through. If you connect it to a console that supports composite and S-video, it'll say, okay, S-video is better, let me grab that and send that one along through. And if you had one that supported RGB, say the Super Nintendo, the fat model, or say the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive, it would take that and pass that along through. So the great thing about that is that while all our consoles in North America were never included a SCART cable, our TVs never had it, it did not exist here, a lot of the console manufacturers still built the capability into the console anyway, which means if you have the console and the appropriate cables, you don't need to modify anything, which is awesome. So yeah, great, really awesome cable. Obviously it's better to buy like high grade ones and all that, but you'll still need a set of that. And they make them, SCART cables in and of themselves are a whole series of asterisks because, well, this is just a generic set of SCART cables going SCART male to SCART male N. You'll need specific ones designed for each individual console. Now I've done entire videos on that as well, on where you get those type of cables for various consoles. And of course they can vary in what type of quality they are. They can vary in what the subtle differences are, because sometimes it'll work and sometimes it won't. It's annoying as hell. SCART's a whole series of asterisks that we're not going into. But at the basic core of it, that's kind of what you need to know. And as I said, there's whole websites dedicated specifically to the video game ones you would need, so it's not that big of a headache. But anyway, once you have the appropriate cables, connect them to the device, connect the device to your TV. That's all you really have to do. So let's dive a little more into the specifics of this device. Now, here's the thing. Going into this device, everything I had read about it or heard about it, everyone said that it was nice for really the purists, the CRT purists. And I know you guys are out there, you hate me a lot. I've seen that over the years. I just don't feel like having a CRT in my home. They're big, they're bulky, I just don't really need it. But I'm not saying it's bad, and I'm certainly not saying it's bad if you want to do that. That's all fine and good. But for those who want it, the idea with this device was basically to take the original resolution of whatever's put into it and just pass it along through. The Super Nintendo, for example, supports 240p, I believe, through its RGB, whereas the Genesis does something funky. It's like 210 or 220. It's like a weirder number. Now, the thing is, when you connect a resolution like that to a modern television, it's not going to work. Modern TVs just gave up. They don't try to do anything prior to 480i in most instances. There's going to be some, especially PC monitors, that can, but for the most part, you're going to find it kind of troublesome to get those lower resolutions to work on a modern television. But the older CRTs, that's what they were designed to do, so they don't have that issue. Now, like I said, what I had expected, basically, is what I'm saying here is, I did not expect this to work on any of my monitors, because I was told it just gives an output straight of whatever it gets. Much to my surprise, it actually worked. Okay, so that was cool. I hooked up my, all right, so I'll show you some footage here. This is my modified, keep that in mind, modified Super Nintendo Junior, RGB modified, and it's running on the HDTV. Now basically what happens here is two things. One, you'll notice a ton of artifacting and random lines on the screen. And then the other thing is you'll notice, well, it ran in 480i. So reading the manual, what I've basically concluded is it's a bonus feature for this thing to work on modern TVs, but it's not meant to run that way. It is seriously intended for the CRTs with component input. Now so it's nice as a bonus feature. If you bought it and decided to move it around in your house, you could technically use it, but it's really not the way this is meant to run. I mean, you'll see it just like in that footage. There is just a lot of lines and extra noise in the video. Now, I think the reason for that is it's attempting to simulate scan lines to make it look more like a CRT. Now, personal preference time, I don't like that. To me, it just adds extra clutter to the screen that doesn't need to be there. But I know some people swear by it. They love it. So to each their own. But yeah, this is not meant to compete with those other 3 devices previously mentioned for like best way to hook it up to a modern television. I can't stress that enough. I know I keep repeating it, but this is only for people with a CRT. Only buy it for that purpose. Because when it comes to that, it's supposed to be exceptional. But unfortunately, I can't personally test that because, as I said, I don't own one. I don't even know anybody really anywhere near me that would have one. I'd have to go like fly to another state entirely to make that happen, and obviously that wasn't going to occur. So it's solid quality. It's obviously built very well. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. It's powered up immediately. I didn't have any sort of issues running it. One thing that's actually very nice about it is I've used in the past other SCART to component adapters, and for whatever reason, they only give you video. I never understood that. You would actually need additional special SCART cables that would have separate audio. Fortunately, that issue is alleviated. This supports both video and audio, which is fantastic, so that's good. It does require a power supply, which it comes with. It is the American style, but it is one of those figure-8 power supplies, so if you're in another part of the world, you can just replace that part and it should work just fine. It supports multiple voltages, so you likely won't run into any sort of issues there, so it's import-friendly. Especially for those of you in Europe, I guess, and in Australia, though a lot of their CRTs actually had SCART built into it, so I don't know what the point would be, but it is a thing. But then again, it might just be the cheaper route rather than buying an older CRT in your part of the world. So yeah, this is, overall it's solid for what it is. But if you're wondering if I'm gonna like show you additional like captured gameplay or any of that stuff, the answer is no. There's no point because I tried that. What happens is my capture device cannot support the lower resolutions. And the machine is smart enough, I'll give it credit, it knows that. So it outputs at a more digital resolution, which means it's essentially just replicating the bonus feature. So if I capture that footage, it doesn't even give you remotely an accurate sense of what it's supposed to look like on top of it being like edited and compressed for YouTube. So there's no point. The only way to really get a sense of how good this thing is or is not is to look at an actual CRT, which again, I don't have. So I'm sorry for that. The other thing I'd like to mention is the Tvm monitors. Obviously people love these things. These were the only way we kind of had this in North America, but that was really only for broadcast stations. However, if you actually have one of those now, there is actually specifically a PVM version of this exact same box. So you could always try that if that interests you. If you're curious which consoles support RGB, which ones would be recommended for something like this and all that, I'll have a big long list in the description, broken down into different sections so you know exactly which consoles are ideal and which ones can at least be modified to become ideal and which ones are totally pointless, either because they were too old to get to the point where they would have supported RGB or because we've moved past it into the high definition era. Feel free to look at that description. So I guess that's kind of all I really have to say. I want to thank Corey again. I know this was kind of a weirder review because I can only do it to a certain point, but that said, I still hope it was educational for you guys. You'll learn something out of it, which is always really what I'm aiming for. And again, if you have a CRT, specifically one with component inputs. It needs component, not composite, component inputs. If it has that, this is probably the device for you. So go ahead and take a look at that. Thank you very much to Corey. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all later.